So we're in ordinary time, the time between all the holidays, and we're going through this series about the habits and mindsets for ordinary time, and we talked about having a practice of gratitude and how people who report joyful lives have more than just like some amorphous attitude of gratitude. They actually take time to make gratitude a practice in their lives. We talked about the idea of release, letting the past be in the past and the future being in the future so that we can be right here. And we're actually going to come back to that at the very end, and we're calling that centeredness. You might call it presence. But that's a core piece of just living through ordinary time. Last week, I wasn't here to talk to you about vocation. I did send out a Bible study a couple days ago, if you want that. Did Doug talk about, Pastor Callison, did he talk about vocation? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Good. Excellent. We're all called. So today we're talking about rhythm, and of course one rhythm is coming to church every week, which you guys are all doing right now. Excellent. Good job. So life is built of a lot of patterns. It doesn't always have patterns, and we're going to talk about those disruptions later on next week. But this week, patterns, the rhythms, the things that happen regularly. So if I had to ask you whether you prefer Christmas or Easter, who in here is a Christmas person? Who's an Easter person? All right. If I had to say, do you prefer Fridays or Mondays? Who's a Friday person? Monday? All right. If I had, who in here just loves birthdays? Anybody like really on for the birthdays? Yeah, some people like that. Taco Tuesday? Taco Tuesday. Rhythms. We got all these rhythms, right? So that's what we're gonna kind of think about, the things that happen regularly in our lives. And we're going to think about things that might happen regularly that are intentional. Sometimes we choose these things, and sometimes they just happen. Sometimes, and there's a little sound coming up here, Tina, for the computer. Sometimes rhythms in our lives are very clear and distinct. Like you can't miss Christmas, right? Like a rhythm might be like this one. Hang on, like this one. Like this one. You test, and you test, and you test. Let me just check one thing, and if that doesn't do it, then we will skip it. All right, so you guys all know that rhythm, right? You can't miss that rhythm. Sometimes the rhythms of our lives are like that. Christmas is like that every year. Boom, boom. But you can't miss it. It comes. Some rhythms are more subtle, like this. Some of you might recognize this artist. Anybody recognize the artist? What?
Kenny G.
Yeah, Kenny G. Yeah. See, there's still a rhythm there, right? But it's kind of more subtle. And then sometimes if you get way into jazz, you end up with rhythms that are almost... And some people's lives are more like this, right? Some people's lives run like clockwork, and some people are just like, I'm flowing through my life, right? But we seem to be rhythmic creatures. We seem to be born with rhythm. It seems to be a natural part of our blood, like this little baby here.
Baby.
He's awesome. Just can barely sit up, and he's already got the groove, right? So we kind of have rhythm built into our lives. It's kind of and it makes sense because our whole universe really runs on rhythm. Think about all the rhythms that we experience. Years, right? That boom, boom. Rhythm's kind of like the bass drum of life. Once that planet circling around the sun, boom, boom, boom. And then we have months, right? The moon going around the earth, do, boom, boom. I am not a beatboxer, so I'm not going to do anything more like that. But we got days, we got weeks, and then some of them are very kind of, they do things to our soul. Sunrises and sunsets. I heard somebody talk about moonrise while we were rehearsing, right? Moonrise over the water. That's kind of a cool thing. How many of you prefer to see the sunrise? I'm going to do sunrise, sunset. Sunrise, people?
Sunset people. Oh, see, now that's about half and half. Sunrise and sunset. I like them both, but I'm a sunrise person. I'll raise my hand for sunrise. So we have all these things, and our universe itself is very cyclical. It's rhythmic. And so thinking about rhythms in our lives is a good way to think about our lives. We have people have rhythm of summer vacation, holidays, birthdays, meals, breathing. Right? We sit here and we have rhythm. Just our very existence is rhythm. It's breathing and heartbeat. Breathing and heartbeat. And so thinking about rhythms, thinking about our lives in terms of rhythms is a very natural way to look at our lives. What goes regularly? And whether or not it's these real long rhythms, it's once a year, or real short rhythms like our own heartbeat. We have rhythms. Now, the scriptures, in the Old Testament, God set up some rhythms for his people. And he set them up intentionally for their good. And as we walk through this idea of rhythm to think through it, I want to just review 4 of these. The first one is the Sabbath day. The Sabbath day is the weekly rhythm, right? 6 days you shall work. I'm reading from Exodus 23. 6 days you shall sow your land and gather in. 6 days you shall do your work. On the 7th day you shall rest. And your ox and your donkey can have rest. And your servants and the sons of your servants and the aliens among you may all be refreshed. So God set up the Sabbath day. Now, interestingly enough, the Sabbath day actually comes after the people were brought out of the land of Egypt, where they had to work 7 days a week. And so their life was all work. And the rhythm of the Sabbath day does a couple things for us. One is it just says, stop. You are more than your work. You are more than your labor. A lot of us tend to draw a lot of our identity from our work, from our production. And the Sabbath day says, you are more than your work. What the Sabbath day also tells us and reminds us as a rhythm is not only that you are more than your work, but also that ultimately your life comes from God. It may come from the earth, because these are farmers in the Old Testament, right? They're all farmers, gatherers and that kind of thing. But 1 day a week, they were supposed to not work. And that's because they were supposed to recognize that even though they had to work, of course you have to work to do that, ultimately your life is in God's hands. And they had to observe the Sabbath even during the planting season and even during the harvest season. So you can imagine they've got like half of their field of wheat harvested, and the other half is growing more mature day by day by day, right? I mean, when it's time to harvest, man, it is time to harvest. You work until you drop to just get that stuff in before it rots in the field. And yet, God said 1 day a week, you just stop. You stop because I am the one who actually takes care of you. And you need to know that I am the one who takes care of you, not you take care of yourself. So you stop and remember that ultimately your life comes from me. And your life is more than work. So the Sabbath is a regular rhythm to remind us of the spirituality of our lives, even though all our lives are spiritual. Now there are some other things. One was actually a Sabbath year. They had they had 6 days and then a 7th day off. 6 years for the land and then a 7th year off for the land. Here's what it says in Deuteronomy 15. At the end of I need rhythm in my mouth. At the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a release. And this is the manner of the release. Listen to this. Let me tell. Imagine, try and see if this would work in the United States. This is the manner of the release. Every creditor shall release what he has lent to his neighbor. So every 7 years, all debts are canceled. You like that? I like that. That's good to me. Let's see. You shall not exact it of your neighbor, but there will be no poor among you. See, one of the things this does is it eliminates that sort of chronic grinding poverty that people get into through bad decisions. A lot of us have made some bad decisions. And I don't know everybody in here's story, but there are some people who end up in what is essentially credit slavery, because they've just taken on so much debt they can't get out from under it. And you know where they really can't get out from under it? Student loans. You know why? And you need to know this. Tell everybody you know. Student loans do not get discharged in bankruptcy. Everybody, it's not always known that. You can get all sorts of debts discharged, but the government takes care of themselves. And I'm not saying anything about that. I'm saying that is a simple truth. You cannot discharge federally guaranteed student loans in a bankruptcy. So people get into this grinding poverty, and God told his people, no, every 7 years, you know what? Every 7 years you just let it go. You hit the reset button, right? Which is really cool in terms of taking care of the poor. And every 7 years you're also supposed to let your land, you're supposed to not plant your fields. You could rotate it, of course, so you always got stuff growing. But for every field you're planting, every 7th year, you're supposed to not plant it. And that does two things. One, it lets the land refresh itself, of course, just from a farming perspective. But the other thing is that the poor were allowed to go harvest on this land. And it's not like our land. You know, if you plant there, that stuff is going to grow the next year, next season too, because it's a lot wilder kind of farming than we do now. And so every 7th year, you were not supposed to plant or harvest. Every piece of land had to have, every 7th year, be not worked by the owner. And that was land that the poor could go in and just take what they needed and harvest their own food and stuff. So the Sabbath year is about the care of the poor and the care of the land. And then there's another big rhythm, probably the biggest rhythm of the life of the Jews. We celebrate it with our Seder meal. It's the Passover. And if you remember, the Passover is the celebration, the remembrance of the night of the deliverance of the Israelites from slavery to Egypt, to freedom. And so every year they celebrate freedom. They celebrate liberty. And if you're sojourning in the land, if you have foreigners there, foreigners get to celebrate too, because the Israelites were foreigners. And they're supposed to take care of other people because they too have been slaves. And so this Passover helps reinforce God's deliverance and reinforce caring for people who are traveling among you, because you have also lived in foreign lands and you know what that's like. There's one more that they never actually celebrated, and it's the year of Jubilee. And here's what's supposed to happen on the year of Jubilee. They have a big ceremony where they sound the trumpet and everything. You consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you when each of you shall return his property, and each of you shall return to his clan. So the year of Jubilee is like the big reset button. If you sell your land to someone else because you go poor, you just need whatever, you sell the land, when that 50th year comes, the land is yours again. And so prices were actually set based on these kind of rhythms. If you had to be sold, if you went into slavery as a debt slave, that would be kind of calculated based on the Sabbath year. Every 7 years the slaves are free and everything. And then the year of Jubilee is the year where all the land actually goes back to its ancestral owner. And everybody goes home. And basically society resets. Why would that be? Because we're all more than our stuff. All these rhythms are designed, God put them there to tell us all that we are more than our stuff. So all the stuff resets at regular intervals so that you don't get overwhelmed with the idea of gathering stuff. So you stay focused, so you stay remembering that ultimately your life is in and with God. So, God's people were supposed to live and work in these rhythms, and some of them celebrated. As far as we know, they never actually celebrated that year of Jubilee, where you spent 49 years getting rich, gathering land, maneuvering around the other people, managing to scoop up their property, and then every 50th year you have to just give it all back. Where's the fun in that, right? So, as far as we know, Israel never even celebrated this Jubilee, and that might be part of why their society collapsed, because they wouldn't do it God's way. So, these rhythms are there for them to help them remember to live, that their life is greater than their work. They're supposed to be caring for the poor of the earth. They're supposed to be people of liberty and freedom, and even for the foreigners living among them. And then life is supposed to reset every 50 years. So these are like cycles that come and go and help remind us of things, to help remind them of things. But we don't live in the Old Testament times. Most of us aren't farmers. We certainly don't live with the kind of laws that say we have to give everything we've managed to accumulate back every 50 years. So what rhythms move through our lives? I think that's the question we want to stick with now for a few minutes. What rhythms move through our lives, and what can they do for us? The first thing rhythms do, when I think of rhythms, I think of anything that kind of happens on a regular basis, like maybe a date night. Some people have a regular date night. It might be every week, it might be every 2 weeks or whatever. Some people have regular devotions. Some people have an exercise rhythm and a schedule. One of the things that rhythms do is they free us from the tyranny of the urgent. Because if there's something you always do on Friday nights, if date night is always Friday night, then you could have an easy week or you could have the craziest week ever. And you still say, no, the date night is the rhythm of my life and it's important, and so I do it. If you have regular devotions, if you get in the habit of regular devotions or prayer, you will find that it will be a very rare occasion when you decide to put that aside to go do something really urgent. And so when we use these rhythms this way, one of the things they can do for us is help our minds not be completely overwhelmed when things get really hectic. Because we've all had times when things get really hectic and our minds are churning and burning and everything just seems like it's on the front burner. We just go from putting out fire to putting out fire to putting out fire. And that's why having some of these other rhythms like date nights or devotions or that kind of thing are really important, because we move into those and out of the frying pan, out of the fire, and off onto the counter where we can relax for a few minutes. So rhythms are important because they can free us from the tyranny of the urgent. Think about rhythms you might have. Another thing that I notice about rhythms is that they kind of free our minds. If we do something very regularly, our minds are a little bit more free to move into that thing. I was reading a book called How to Be Here by a guy named Rob Bell, and he was talking about that he used to work a lot, and finally he and his wife decided he just needed to really set a day off. And so now his day off starts on Friday afternoon at 4, and he doesn't turn his computer on or his phone on or anything until Sunday evening again. That's kind of his rhythm. And here's what he says. He says when he started it, here's what happened, is that the first time he did that, he and his wife just about went crazy. Because you don't realize how much your mind is not letting go of all that stuff, all those fires, all that stuff on the front burner. You don't realize how much that's simmering. You're keeping it on the burner all the time until you actually forcefully drop it. And he recalls very vividly sitting around on Saturday afternoon, both him and his wife just feeling squirmy and antsy because they had cut off all the communication for a while because that was their day off. And he says now what happens though, now that he's got that rhythm, and this is actually where I'm going with this, now that he's managed to establish that rhythm, he says when he turns off his computer on, and I'm telling you him, not his story, not my story, because I'm not good at this. And he is, at least he says in his book. He says when he turns his computer off, he can physically feel it. He can physically feel his body make that change. And the reason that it happens really quickly is because it's a rhythm. It's a rhythm in his life, and so when he does it, his body's able to move there very quickly because he does it every week, all the time. So when you make things a rhythm, there's less of a transition time. There's another thing that happens when you make things rhythmic, is that, and this is part as a positive, is that you don't have to spend so much time thinking about them. I found a breakfast I really like, and I eat it basically every morning. So now I don't get up and I don't have to spend 2 thought seconds wondering what I'm going to have for breakfast. I just get up and make my breakfast, and it is delicious, and I love it, and I'm going to eat it every morning, and it never gets old. It's fantastic. Albert Einstein reportedly had a closet full of duplicate suits. Pardon me?
He didn't have to decide.
Right, he didn't have to decide. The rhythm of his wardrobe was gray suit, gray suit, gray suit, gray suit, gray suit, gray suit, gray suit. Went good with his hair, I guess. But so another thing about finding rhythms frees your mind. You don't have to spend your thought time. You don't have to spend your willpower deciding things that don't need to be decided when you set rhythms in your life. The downside, though, is that if your rhythm is something that involves your mind and spirit, you have to be careful. You have to be careful not to let that be done unmindfully. How many of you ever pray, "Come, Lord Jesus, be our guest, and let these gifts to us be blessed, amen"? It's pretty easy to do. How many of you got to the Lord's Prayer and sort of got to the end of it, and you're like, "Oh, here we are at the end of the prayer, and I was thinking about what I was going to do this afternoon," or something like that. How many of you have ever gotten to, it happens a lot for people if they're driving somewhere, they drive regularly, you get to the destination, and you're like, "Oh my goodness, I have no idea how I just made that trip," because my mind was completely distracted by something else. Yeah, and so that's the danger of rhythms, at least when it comes to mental and spiritual things, is that you do have to be intentional to keep them to be mindful. And sometimes that's just, like if it's your prayer before your meal, take a moment and pause, and then pray the prayer. Or switch it up. You could pray like, "Dear God, thank you for these green beans. They look delicious, and I'm looking forward to them." You could pray all sorts of things, as long as you don't have, there's no law about praying before meals, but if you're going to pray before meals, there's a moment of thankfulness and mindfulness. Figure out ways to switch it up, or even just stop for a moment and think. Stopping and thinking will go a long way. So they can free your mind, having these rhythms. In our lives, we have rhythms that are intentional and unintentional. How many of you have ever gotten in a habit you didn't realize you were getting into, and you realized that you ended up in a habit that you weren't intending to form? That can happen to people. I think one of the ways, and we're going to get back to this in just a moment, one of the ways that happens is griping. Griping, complaining. It's kind of easy sometimes, if your life isn't going smoothly, to slip into a habit of complaining. And you don't even know you have started to become a complainer. And then somehow you realize it. But we have these intentional habits and unintentional. But what I want to do, actually, just for a couple minutes, I want to get right down to the root. Like when Steve's playing the drum kit, there's a lot of different things. But the bass drum is like the bass rhythm for everything. Boom, boom, boom. Then everything else gets added on. And our life has a very basic rhythm to it. There's a basic little kind of a drumbeat of our lives. And I want to give you some word pairs to think about. Word pairs to think about your lives. And these are on the thing, if you want to look at it in a circle, you could even do that. And this morning's sermon is more of a reflection that here's what I studied in the Bible and found out for you. I mean, obviously we've already talked about the Bible and stuff, but this is just for you to think about. What's kind of the basic rhythm of my life? And I'm going to give you some word pairs. Here's the first pair. Is the basic rhythm of my life faith or fear? How does my life run? What's that boom, boom? What's that underlying beat? Is it boom, 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 boom? Do I have this drumbeat of faith that undergirds everything? Or is it more like boom, 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 boom? A drumbeat of fear that undergirds everything? Because one of the things that Jesus came to bring us, Jesus came, obviously, to die on the cross, forgive our sins, all that stuff. We get to be with God forever. But he didn't come just to give us a golden ticket into the heavenly city. He came to change the way we see everything. He came to give us new eyes and new ears. He came to change our view of the universe and the people around us and everything. And he wants to change it from fear, boom, 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 to faith, boom, boom, boom. Day in and day out, moment by moment, the rhythm of our lives. It is trust that God is working. If it's easy, we trust that God is working. If things are hard, we trust that God is working. If things are really horrible and evil does happen, horrible things happen, but we trust that even in the horribleness of things that happen, God is still working. God was working in Pulse 2 weeks ago. God was working there. That was an act of evil, but God was working. And I have to say that I think Orlando had a pretty cool response as far as that goes. I don't know, have anybody been downtown? Gone downtown to look? If you haven't gone downtown, you really should go downtown to that plaza right in front of the Dr. Phillips Center and look at all that memorial stuff. It'll probably make you cry. It made me cry. But you're going to see one act of hate responded to with thousands and thousands and thousands of words of love. That's the drumbeat you want in your lives. Love, love, love. Do you see the hate? Yes. Love, love, love. Do you acknowledge the hate? Yes. Love, love, love. That's the drumbeat Jesus came to bring. We trust Jesus. We know he's working, and so we walk in love. So is the drumbeat of your life, is it faith or is it fear? Another one, I think, a word pair that's worth thinking about. Is the drumbeat of your life, is it grace or is it judgment? Is it kind or is it cold? What's the drumbeat that goes on in your head? What's the story that you're living? Where are you? How does your character experience the story of your life? How are you contributing to the story of other people's lives? Are you bringing grace into their lives? Do they know that there's a grace person? Boom, boom, boom. Because the rhythm of their life is grace. It's just gracious. They're that kind of person. Oh, they might be in a bad mood and snap once in a while. But they're a gracious person, and they're going to leave me in grace. And I know that I can count on them, boom, boom, to be gracious. I was involved in a little... I know I have somebody in my life who had a falling out with a friend. And this person, it was a young person, so there's a kind of a text thing going on. And this person went to another person to ask their advice. And when they saw what had gone on, this person's advice was burn them. What's the rhythm there? Is that grace, grace, grace? Or is that judgment, judgment, judgment? Take them out, knock them down, hurt them back, hurt them more. Jesus came to move the rhythm of our lives from judgment of other people to grace toward other people. Here's another word pair. Gratitude or bitterness. What's the rhythm of your life? When you get up in the morning and you think about what you have to do for the day. Do you have the rhythm of gratitude? Are you thankful? Are you grateful? Or are you mostly just kind of bitter? Are you mostly just kind of subtly angry at how hard everything seems? What's the rhythm? What's the rhythm of your life? What's the rhythm of your thoughts? Here's another word pair you can think about. Abundance or scarcity. Abundance or scarcity. Are you always worried? Scarcity is like worry. It's like fear. There's never going to be quite enough. I had kind of a scarcity mentality when it came to kids. We would never have any kids if I was the deciding factor, because I always wanted to have a little bit more in the bank. We needed a little bit more stability, whatever. I kind of had a scarcity mentality, And Kelly said, if we wait for what you want, we will never have kids, John. Don't worry, it works out. You have kids, you make it work. It's fine. And she was completely right. And I was completely wrong. And I had this scarcity. When I thought about kids, I heard the scarcity drumbeat going off in my head. What if, what if, what if, what if? And she had the faith, the grace, the abundance mentality going off in her head. It'll work out. It'll work out. It'll work out. It'll work out. How will it work out? I don't know, but it'll work out. It'll work out. It'll work out. So that rhythm. So what is the drumbeat of your life? What do you think about all the time? How does your life move like that? What's underneath all your thoughts? Because that basic, all your other rhythms of your life are going to be building on that kind of basic rhythm that we tried to nail down those word pairs. So if you find yourself and you're thinking of some of those words, you're like, I don't actually like the way I've been thinking lately, or I need to, or maybe you want to move the drumbeat of your life further toward grace, further toward gratitude, further toward a sense of abundance. There are 3 habits that the scriptures have typically taught us that are habits that will help us move that basic drumbeat of our life where Christ came to move it. And those 3 habits are spiritual time. Some people call it devotions. For some people it's Bible study. For some people it's prayer. For some people it's meditation. But you can't just tell yourself to think away, but you can put on your calendar that you are going to spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 3 minutes a day doing spiritual self-care type of stuff, whether it's Bible study, devotions, whatever. That's a habit that will change the basic drumbeat of your life and move it toward gratitude, move it toward grace, move it toward abundance, move it toward faith. Another one, which we already talked about, and we had a whole sermon about, so I'm just going to say, purposely practicing gratitude will move that drumbeat of your life to that direction that you want to. And then gathering together, which of course I'm talking to a bunch of people who are gathered together here, but even in the early church, people were already they stopped getting together. And Paul had to write to them and say, listen, don't give up, get together. As some have already started doing, because we need each other. We need Jesus and we need each other. He says we all are the body of Christ. And so we need each other. So those are the 3 habits that can help you move those word pairs in the direction of the kingdom of God, in the direction of what Jesus came to make our life about, which is love, 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 love. Let's take a moment to pray. Father, sometimes our lives are like smoothly flowing rivers with everything seems to kind of drumbeats going fine. Sometimes our lives seem like a crazy drum solo, like stuff going on all over the place. But you look underneath all that and you desire for us that our hearts would be renewed in faith and trust in you as we work out our lives. So what I want to ask you right now is to give each of us, even though it might hurt, give each of us a sense of what that underlying drumbeat of our life is. What for each of us, what is the underlying rhythm that's driving us? Or at least kind of where does it fall on a scale between those words? Help us to see where we can move toward abundance from scarcity. Help us to see where we can move toward faith and away from fear. Help us to see where we can move toward grace and away from judgment. And Father, help us be open to the addition of physical, scheduled rhythms and habits of spiritual time, gratitude practices, and gathering with other Christians. Help us be open to adding those to our lives and cementing them in our lives as rhythms that we know will help that basic drumbeat of our lives move further and further toward love. The love that you showed us in Jesus Christ, in whose name we pray.